What's up, guys? Welcome to the channel. Back here with Andy. Earlier this week, we went over our favorite draft strategy for picks 1 through 4. We're going to come back at you with our favorite draft strategy and tips, techniques, whatever you want to call it, for picks 5 through 8 if you're picking in the middle of the first round. And I say we just get this thing going. Andy's going to start us off with a hot take, someone that we've been relying on for years. But Andy, your first round strategy, if you're drafting in the middle of the first round, is what?
So this sounds absolutely crazy. And you might look at the cheesehead behind me and my Rasheed Walker left tackle jersey on and be like, this is 100% biased. But I'll be the first one to say Justin Jefferson is the best wide receiver in the NFL. This is not a knock on his talent at all or who he is on the football field. This is only about his quarterback situation. I mean, he has only been amazing, but rookie quarterbacks have not been amazing for fantasy wide receivers. The best wide receiver finish by somebody with a rookie quarterback throwing to him was Steve Smith, who finished wide receiver 7. So there is definitely a ceiling cap. There's only been 4 rookie quarterbacks to ever throw for more than 25 touchdowns. Only 19 have thrown for 20 or more touchdowns. So assuming that eventually J.J. McCarthy gets this starting job this year, and honestly, not loving Sam Darnold that much either, I think there's a massive touchdown cap on his season because he could still have monster yardage and be out of the top 3. And if you're drafting at 8 and all these other guys are gone, I don't mind taking Justin Jefferson there because his floor is so high. But I think this year his ceiling is like right above it. I feel like he's going to be somewhere between wide receiver like 5 and 8, which is still great for your team. But you look at Jamar Chase, you look at Amon-Ra, you look at Bijan, you look at Breece, you look at the other guys there, and they all offer that number 1 overall upside that I just don't think Jefferson has this year. So I still love him if I get him later. I just don't like him in this round. Or not in this round, but in this part of the round.
So to clarify, your cutoff for Jefferson would be what, like A.J. Brown? You're taking him over A.J. Brown.
That's where I'm like,
the other elites.
Yeah, it's just that elite tier where, yeah, you get to the back half of the first round and he's there. I would love Justin Jefferson on my team. It's just that first half when there's so many other guys who can give you the wide receiver 1 or the running back 1 overall finish. And I just don't think because of the quarterback situation that Jefferson has that. Not a knock on him, just for fantasy football, rookie quarterbacks are not a great match to have a high-scoring wide receiver.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely an interesting take, and I will say it's not that I'm like totally anti what you're saying, because what I'm going to go here is my suggestion for my mid-first round pick here is Jamar Chase, and that is over Justin Jefferson. I'm taking Jamar Chase over Justin Jefferson in a similar sense, just because I really loved what I saw out of Chase in that stretch of weeks where Joe Burrow was healthy, Jamar Chase was healthy. It was kind of in the middle season last year. He was a top 3, I think, wide receiver, and he was averaging just monster games. Obviously, Burrow came back slow from the calf. Then Burrow didn't finish the season. But in that middle portion of the season, I loved what I saw from Jamar Chase. I think he has the upside. And just like what you're saying, we need to switch our brains from dynasty, where we're not worried about this slow rookie start with Justin Jefferson, and kind of turn to what Andy's saying, where it's like, a slow 8 weeks for Justin Jefferson could be the difference between being like, you know what? I should have taken Jamar Chase. I should have taken Amon-Ra St. Brown in that offense. But just like Andy said, if you're picking 7, 8, 9, Jefferson's a great floor player. And it really does depend on build as well. Like if you're going super risky rounds 2 through 5, maybe you convince yourself into Jefferson because of the talent. But I think it's an interesting take, and we're both really liking the wide receivers here in the middle of this round. We definitely both, if you watched our last video, love Breece Hall. So if he slides to you at 5 through 8, we're saying slam take Breece Hall. We just both kind of are looking at his ADP and the hype surrounding him. And I just feel like come September, when these Labor Day drafts are coming, Breece Hall is going to get taken at 3 or 4, maybe even 2 by the time it comes around, dude. And because he could just win you your league. But just like Andy said, there's some great value mid-round here. So if you're going JJ or down year for JJ, Andy's saying go after some of these other wide receivers. I'm saying going after Chase specifically. Andy, in the second round, who are you looking to swing back around in the middle of the second round and add to your team?
So in some leagues and some platforms, he's going a little bit earlier in the second, but I think Kyren Williams here is an absolute steal. He was the running back 2 in points per game. I mean, he's great both on the ground and as a pass catcher. He was averaging over 4 targets and a touchdown per game, plus all those yards and carries. I'm not scared that Blake Corum is going to come in and take his job. And I think even if Corum comes in to spell him, I mean, Kyren was getting like 30 touches a game. If that drops to like 22, 23 touches, that's still elite volume. And he's proven that he can be very effective, even without a massive volume. He's just a great running back. So I think you have still an RB1 overall upside, probably a little bit lower of a floor than guys like Bijan and Brees and some of the guys that you're also getting at the end of the first round. But I think that he can, easily be a difference maker for your team. And then
100%.
Yeah, and then the other guy I'm going to talk about right now, he's going a little bit more middle of the third, and I still like his value there. But this is with all the rumors about Brandon Ayuk. I mean, we're recording this early August, so we should get some clarification soon. And I would imagine that if Ayuk is traded, Deebo Samuel's ADP goes up to this range, and I absolutely love it. He was the wide receiver 2 overall for fantasy football after the bye week. So in the last few weeks of the season, Deebo Samuel absolutely went nuclear. We're just a couple years removed from him being the wide receiver 2 or 3 overall. He's still a great player. The problem is there's just so many weapons on that team with McCaffrey, Kittle, Ayuk, and him, where you take one of those weapons away, especially this other amazing wide receiver, and you funnel some more targets to Deebo. I think he is going to be elite once again for fantasy football.
Yeah, I mean, dude, my heart loves Deebo Samuel. Something about watching that guy. I think we all love him. And like you said, the biggest thing we have against some of these San Francisco weapons, Ayuk, Deebo, Kittle, I'm not including McCaffrey. We all know what McCaffrey does, is just that there's so many good players that sometimes it can be kind of hard to share that load. But if Ayuk gets traded, the upside of Deebo does start to become a very interesting aspect to your fantasy team, because just like Andy said, for stretches last year, he was a top 5 wide receiver. And then just a couple years ago, he was a top 5 wide receiver again. So it's pretty hard to make the argument that Deebo Samuel can't outperform his ADP if you take him in the second round. But obviously there's some risk reward with that. And love the Kyren pick as well. He's kind of going at like 16, I think, is kind of consensus. So I could definitely see some versions where if you're picking in the middle of the second round, if your draft gets a little wide receiver happy, maybe the guy I'm going to talk about in a little bit, maybe Drake London gets picked up there. It really only takes a couple, 0 RB drafters or guys who just are targeting these wide receivers for Kyren Williams, who, let's not forget, was top 3 in points per game last year and a top, I think he was RB6, but top 8 running back in season long. So this dude has the upside. And to go in here, the guy I was saying that maybe could get taken over Kyren Williams in the second round is going to be Marvin Harrison Jr. And for me, I just love the role that he's stepping into for the Cardinals. I think back a couple years to the way Kyler Murray used DeAndre Hopkins, who's just an elite route runner, a big-bodied guy who catches the ball in strong hands. And I just think Marvin Harrison is going to grow into that role, and I think it's going to happen pretty fast with his draft capital and just his legacy and everything we think about Marvin Harrison. Now, it is a bit of a risky pick, but I do think Marvin Harrison has that upside, just like we were speaking about Deebo Samuel, but he's not competing with as many weapons, which was kind of why we put the little asterisk next to Deebo on Ayuk getting traded, pushes Deebo up into this range. So I'm curious too, Andy, just to kind of add on to this question. If Ayuk stays in San Fran, where's your range for Deebo?
I mean, I think he still has the upside to be a top 12 guy. I think you throw top 8 probably out the window, but I think if he's like wide receiver 9 through wide receiver 15, I'm not going to be surprised at all. I wouldn't so much go for him then in the middle of the second, but you're at the start of the third, the middle of the third. I think where he's going right now is still getting a pretty great value on him.
If you feel great about the floor of your first 2 round picks, I think Deebo Samuel would be such a fun 3rd round pick to just put this Charlie Day wild card onto your fantasy team that could just be like, yeah, I won because I took Deebo in the 3rd round and he went off. So Andy's 3rd round pick here, he's reaching into the top tier of quarterbacks. And Andy, why do you like Jalen Hurts here in the 3rd round?
So for a long time, I was definitely more of a late round quarterback guy, just because a lot of times the difference in points wasn't that crazy between, quarterback 5 and quarterback 12. And to some extent, that's still true, but there's always those guys at the top end who outscore the rest of the field by a lot. And I think Jalen Hurts, he's proven that he's one of those guys. I mean, he's been a top guy the last couple of years. He's got the rushing ability. He's got the touchdown rushing ability. Maybe without Kelsey, there's a little less tush push, but it's so effective. I still feel that's going to be part of their game plan. They've got a new offensive coordinator, so I think this offense is going to be more dynamic. And, you think that when you think back to last year, you think, oh, he was a great quarterback the first half and not great the second half. And that's just not true. The Eagles as a team struggled the second half of the year. But for fantasy football, he was still quarterback 3 in points per game when the Eagles were losing games. So I think his floor is so high and his ceiling is quarterback 1 overall, that in the 3rd, I'm willing to grab that guy who I know is a difference maker at this position.
Are you concerned at all about the addition of Barkley, or do you just think there's enough rushing touchdowns to go around in that Philly offense?
Yeah, I think there's enough, and I don't expect him. He had like 15 or 16 last year. I'm not expecting that, but I still think, if Barkley takes 5 of those and he's sitting around 10, he's still going to be an elite, top 3 quarterback for fantasy football. And I mean, Barkley's also one of those running backs where he's a great pass catcher. And if Jalen Hurts throws a little screen pass and Barkley can take it 50 yards to the house, that's still a lot of points for Jalen Hurts. So I think the more dynamic the offense, the more opportunities they have to score, that's just better for fantasy football in general.
Yeah, Hurts is a great one. And like you said, he just has this floor because of those, whatever you want to call them, cheap, free rushing touchdowns. It is what it is. When you have Jalen Hurts, you love him. When you're playing against him, you think it's the stupidest thing in fantasy football. But for my build here, I'm going with 3 straight wide receivers. So I'm really liking this 0 RB build for a middle pick. And I'm going my 3rd wide receiver here of Jaylen Waddle from Miami. I just think Jaylen Waddle kind of has this upside and safety. It's this weird combination where if Tyreek Hill goes down, Jaylen Waddle could be a league winner. I'm not saying Tyreek Hill's going to get hurt. I'm not trying to project that by any reason, but he has that in his back pocket. And also, let's just not forget that besides last year, which was a really strange year for Jaylen Waddle, he was a top 10 wide receiver his sophomore year. He was a top 13 PPR wide receiver when he was a rookie. So this dude has basically been a top 15 to top 10 wide receiver 2 out of the 3 years in his career. Besides last year, he was just dealing with some weird injuries, a couple back injuries in the middle of games, and they really disrupted kind of just his stats in general. He actually wasn't as bad as you thought when he was on the field. He just lost and missed a lot of half games that made his stats look a lot worse. So I think you could do a lot worse than targeting someone like Jaylen Waddle here in the 3rd round, especially if you have 2 other wide receivers in front of him. So you allow Jaylen Waddle to kind of be a swing player for your team. Andy, how do you feel about targeting Waddle in the 3rd round, especially with a middle pick?
I am super into this, and it kind of goes with some of the next guys I might have on my list. But in really prolific offenses, there is room for 2 wide receivers to be top fantasy guys. Like you were saying, just in 2022, Tyreek Hill was the wide receiver 3, Jaylen Waddle was the wide receiver 9, and he was, what is this here? Less than a point behind the wide receiver 7. So he can be a difference maker for your team. And if you drafted him last year in round 2, I know I took him in an auction draft, paid a lot of money for him, and was disappointed. But dealing with the back injuries, like sometimes you've got to just let a season go. I remember when we first started playing fantasy football, I drafted Randy Moss super early when he was on the Raiders. It was terrible that year. Said, you know what? I think he's washed. I'm not drafting Randy Moss anymore. Next year he goes to the Patriots, breaks all sorts of records, wide receiver 1. And that's something that's important to remember. Just because a player burned you before doesn't mean they're not going to be great in the future. And Jaylen Waddle can definitely be great.
Yeah, I mean, and just like you said with injuries, something I have always tried to keep in mind with fantasy is that I do truthfully believe that prior injury really has no like binding effect on future injury, with the exception of a couple guys that maybe just have the worst luck ever. But in general, I don't really think getting hurt 2 years ago makes you any more likely to get hurt this year. And sometimes you do kind of just have to forget about someone burning you a season ago. Moving it to round 4 here, looks like Andy's going with the stack. Tell us why Devonta Smith is a good pick to pair with Jalen Hurts in your mid-round strategy here.
Well, I mean, it's a lot of the same reasons we talked about for Waddle, where, A.J. Brown is going early, and I think he's solid for somebody to take at the end of the first, but there's room for 2 great wide receivers. Jaylen Waddle was wide receiver 9, less than a point more than him that same year, wide receiver 7, Devonta Smith. So he's proven he can be that guy. I also like this new offensive coordinator. Reports are that they're moving Devonta Smith around in the formation. He's running more routes out of the slot. And that's something that the best teams do with their best wide receivers. CeeDee Lamb is not always lined up on the outside. They move him around to get great matchups. And the fact that they're doing that with Devonta Smith gives me some really high hopes that he can bounce back and be a top guy again this year like he was 2 years ago.
Yeah, that's also very intriguing that you compared him to CeeDee Lamb, because let's keep in mind the offensive coordinator from the Cowboys a couple years ago, Kellen Moore, coming over to the Eagles, really utilized Keenan Allen in a lot of rub routes, motion routes. And just like you said, I would expect these 2 Eagles wide receivers. I'm also very high on A.J. Brown this year as well. I just think Kellen Moore is going to design some plays that gets them open a little easier and kind of just uses those rub routes, those little cheesy plays that get some free catches for those guys. Where last year they basically just lined them up and said, go win, go beat your cornerback. Now, luckily, they're good players, so they still have pretty good seasons. But, I don't think it's out of the question that Devonta Smith gets some of these first read plays to him. As much as we love A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith, also an amazing player. So for me here in this build, my round 4 target is going to be James Cook. I also would target Alvin Kamara as well. We spoke about him in a previous video. But I just think with James Cook, I really like what I saw late season with the Bills last year. Them only really adding a couple pieces in the wide receiver core. Keon Coleman in the draft, someone I spoke about in a sleeper video. Andy talked about him in our mock draft live show the other day. Curtis Samuel. I mean, these are good players. I don't really feel like they're truly great players. So I just think James Cook is going to be very involved. And I think he has the upside to be a top back. And going here kind of in the 4th round, I think you can get him. When it comes to Alvin Kamara, I just love the percent of the offense that Alvin Kamara is going to be. Yes, he may not be as explosive as he once was, but he's going to be involved. He's going to get his touches. He's going to get his catches. And I think for someone going in the 4th round, to be able to get someone who could probably still be an RB1 for you is great value.
No, for sure. And I mean, they kind of went to more of a run first offense the back half of the year with the offensive coordinator change, and it worked for them, up until they lost in the playoffs, but they were winning games. And as long as they're winning games, why would you change that offensive philosophy? So I like James Cook. I like his upside, and I like his floor too.
So moving into the 5th round here, Andy, who do you like in your build? And maybe walk us through your previous picks too, just so we can kind of see how your roster is building out.
Yeah. So right now, I mean, it was kind of best player available. Either Breece Hall, Bijan, Amon-Ra, Chase. I mean, at 8, JJ, don't mind him there. Round 2, Kyren Williams. And then we went Jalen Hurts. We went Devonta Smith. So we've got a couple of wideouts. We've got a running back. We've got our quarterback. And I'm going to keep the wide receivers going with T. Higgins. another number 2 on a great offense. If you drafted him last year, he burned you a lot worse than Devonta Smith did. But, kind of similar with Jaylen Waddle. He was injured on and off. And when we go back to when everybody on Cincinnati was healthy, 2022, Higgins was wide receiver 13 in points per game. He is still a very good wide receiver. And this year they lost Joe Mixon. They lost their slot wide receiver. Name I'm blanking on right now. Tyler Boyd. Our boy Tyler Boyd is gone. So I just think that, at this late, he's going as wide receiver 28. Like, I think that he still has upside to be a solid wide receiver 2 for your team. I don't know if he can quite get to wide receiver 1 territory, but we're talking about round 5. And in this draft here, as my, second, third, or fourth wide receiver, like, this is, I think, an amazing value for somebody who I think is going to bounce back, just like I think a lot of these other, number 2 options on great offense as well this year.
Yeah, it's so interesting to look at the ADPs on like a year to year, right? Because last year, guys like Waddle, Devonta Smith, T. Higgins, 3 guys we've talked about in this video were all going a lot higher than they're going this year. They all kind of had quote unquote down years for what we expected. And now just kind of the consensus of fantasy drafters has reacted, and they've all been pushed down a decent amount. Devonta Smith going in the 3rd round last year, Jaylen Waddle in the 2nd. T. Higgins was a 2-3 turn guy last year, right around Jaylen Waddle. And really nothing has changed in a negative sense besides what we saw last year gave us some little hope. Like Andy pointed out, and maybe I haven't actually need to move T. Higgins up because, he's very right here, right? Like, Joe Mixon left, Tyler Boyd left. These were both security blankets for the Bengals offense. And T. Higgins still has that upside, especially in a points per game sense. If that Cincinnati offense passes as much as they have in the past, there's plenty of targets to go around for T. Higgins. So for me, I don't usually like to do this, but I'm going to go back-to-back Bills in this build. Now, luckily, the Bills are a top 5 offense in the NFL, so this is one of the few exceptions where I like to really double up on offensive weapons on the same team. But James Cook, round 5, swinging around here to Dalton Kincaid. I haven't taken a quarterback yet in this build, so I decided to reach on tight end here in round 5. Or not even reach, but I think this is just a good value. We spoke about in our last draft strategy video for picks 1 through 4, how Andy and I both really love the tight ends kind of late 4 through middle 5, late 5. I think this is a great place to target one of these stud tight ends if they are still available for you. And Dalton Kincaid is one of my favorite guys to target in that range. When I look at tight ends, I just really like to look at someone who can be the number 1 option in their offense. And I think Dalton Kincaid possesses that. It doesn't mean it's a foregone conclusion that Kincaid's going to be the number 1 weapon, but that's also why he's not going as the tight end 1. He's kind of going more in this 3 through 6 range with guys like Laporta, Kelsey, and I even think in general McBride and Andrews are kind of going over Kincaid. So I'm even kind of on the lower end here of which tight end is going to be available. But I just love the upside, and I'm willing to take a shot that Kincaid's going to be a difference maker for your fantasy team this year.
Yeah, and, there was a stretch of games last year where he was absolutely amazing and on fire, and Sam Laporta might have change some stuff where you think that, rookie tight ends can go off and be valuable for fantasy, but that is usually not the case. So the fact that he still showed out in a few games his rookie year is a great sign that he's going to be a very valuable fantasy football asset for years to come. And this year 2 offense with no Diggs, with no Gabe Davis, where there's such a target vacuum, I think he could be the guy, like you said, who, if he's the number 1 option for this team, he could still finish tight end 1 overall, and you're grabbing him in the 5th.
And something, too, about the Bills' passing offense from last year, and Kincaid especially. Kincaid only had 2 receiving touchdowns last year. Josh Allen had under 30 passing touchdowns last year with 15 rushing touchdowns. Or no, sorry, not actually. He might have 15 as well, along with Hurts. I'm just getting confused because we were talking about that earlier. But I just feel like that's going to regress a little bit towards the mean, and I think there's going to be some more passing touchdowns for Allen as well to go around with Kincaid. And with tight ends, TDs can be super, super fickle, and they matter so much to bump you up and down these tight end rankings. So, Andy, in round 6 here, looks like you're going back into the RB pool. Why Najee Harris? I do kind of like the upside of him. He really has slid down in ADP compared to where he was a couple years ago.
No, for sure. I mean, he's going as RB23. He's the 69th player off the board. Nice. And he finished as RB20 last year. So he's being drafted later than he went last year. And I think they've made some great changes on offense to get him more opportunity. We lost Deontay Johnson. And they brought in Arthur Smith, who, say what you want about him, but the man loves to run the football, which is great for Najee Harris. The Falcons had the 3rd most rush attempts last year. The Steelers were 9th, and I feel like that number could easily come up a little bit higher with the personnel that they have. Jaylen Warren, I think, is also a very good back, but I don't think he's good enough to just steal the role from Najee. I think they're still going to be mixing in and out of that rotation, but I think Najee's probably going to get the bulk of the work. Reports already slimmed down a little bit. This is a contract year for him. So I feel like he has some very solid upside. And in the 6th round at running back 23, like if you go like full 0 RB, I don't mind him as an RB1. I love him as an RB2, or if you're grabbing him as a flex player here. So.
Yeah, I'm pretty with you here. I remember, I think it was a couple months ago, I was talking about Najee on a Buy Low episode in a Dynasty show, but it really is for the same reasons you're kind of talking about now, that I just think his value is dipped a little lower than it probably needs to be, especially in a redraft sense where you're not really having to buy into his future at all. You really only care about this year. As silly and memeable as Arthur Smith is, let's not forget he actually was a pretty good offensive coordinator. He's a pretty bad head coach. I'm not giving him any credit in the head coaching industry here. But offensive coordinator-wise, I mean, back in Tennessee, he did a great job with A.J. Brown. Obviously, Derrick Henry absolutely ate when Arthur Smith was there. And just kind of like you said, and something that I've really learned a lot over the past 3, 4, 5 years, J.J. Zacharyson actually says this a lot, and he loves in these middle rounds targeting guys in ambiguous backfields. That's the exact term he uses, because there's a lot of value to be had if you land the guy that wins the backfield. I think Najee Harris is in that exact situation. Of course, there's some downside if you draft the wrong guy, but something we spoke about a lot in our tips and tricks video, which I'll make sure to link down below in our bio, is that upside is really the most important thing in fantasy football when it comes to these middle round picks. And Najee Harris is that perfect example. You know, if he just hits his floor and he only gets 10 to 15 touches a game and he's RB24, it's still a usable asset, and that's what his ADP is showing here. But if he takes over and he's the lead back, you just hit on a guy that you were not expecting to in round 6 of the draft. So round 6 here for me, one of my favorite wide receiver values. This is just my lock and loaded wide receiver value pick in the middle rounds here, and that's going to be Christian Kirk. This is my 4th wide receiver in this build. I'm going pretty heavy 0 RB. I really only have the 1 RB on the roster so far in James Cook. Just to kind of run down my team so far, I got Jamar Chase, Marvin Harrison, Jaylen Waddle, James Cook, Dalton Kincaid, and then I'm adding Christian Kirk here in the 6th round as well. And I just think Christian Kirk is set up for a really solid season with the Jaguars. I think we forgot how consistent he was when he was out with his injury last year. And Christian Kirk, to me, is just their number 1 wide receiver for this year. We will see what happens with Brian Thomas Jr. moving forward. He's still a rookie, and unless he has some massive blow up, Christian Kirk's probably going to lead the team in targets this year, in my opinion. And he's the guy that gets all of the first downs for this team, which I think is a very telling statistic for most passing offenses on who the quote-unquote actual wide receiver 1 is for their team.
Yeah, no, I'd find myself taking Christian Kirk a lot when I'm doing mock drafts in this range. You know, I love the chemistry that he's been building over the last couple of years with Trevor Lawrence. And, you know, if this offense does take a bit of a step forward, we've been, projecting it, last year and the year before, and it hasn't fully come together. But sometimes it just takes a few years and takes a little bit of change. And we're talking about round 6 guys here. So there's definitely a lot of upside with him.
Yeah, I think Kirk is the perfect player where if you're looking at your team kind of rounds 1 through 5 and you think there's a lot of risk, a lot of upside kind of built into some of your players, I think Kirk is the perfect player to kind of just balance that out with, get a guy who you know is going to produce. But speaking of upside, round 7, Andy, tell us about Rashee Rice and why you think he's kind of worth the ADP here.
So this is the ultimate gamble pick, and I think hopefully we know a little bit more in the next few weeks about what's going to happen with him. But if there wasn't a suspension looming, where would he be going in fantasy football drafts? I feel like he would be like a second, third round wide receiver. Like he'd be going for sure way higher than this. With the end of his year last year, the rapport he's building with Mahomes. But you're taking him here in the 7th, and there's a chance that this suspension doesn't happen at all this season. That, you know, it's happened before when Ezekiel Elliott had some legal troubles come up. It took an entire year before he was suspended. So this is obviously a huge gamble. It could happen in the middle of the season. It could happen during the fantasy football playoffs. He all of a sudden gets suspended. So this is only if you feel very comfortable with your starting lineup and you're just looking to take a shot on somebody who could be an absolute league winner. This isn't if I draft quarterback and tight end and I'm still looking to fill my flex spot, I'm not taking Rashee Rice here. But if I've gone super running back, wide receiver heavy, and the tight ends have gone, the quarterbacks I like have gone, there's, you know, nobody really left that I love. I think taking that risk could be, you know, give you a shot to be the number 1 team. And like we were saying before, you don't play fantasy football to be the 4th best team. You want to be the best team.
Yeah, I actually, now that you talk about it, man, I would love to do a study on like the value of players that have been suspended in the last couple of years, because the two that come to mind to me are Alvin Kamara and Ezekiel Elliott. And I think if you took those guys in both of the years that they were suspended, you were incredibly happy with what you got from them once they came back. And with Rashee Rice, he's not even suspended yet. He's just being drafted as if he's going to be suspended. So he's a very intriguing pick. And like you said, I mean, as of now, I'm totally happy to take him at this pick. Now, if he rises up to round 4 with a potential suspension looming, I think I'm out. But that's kind of the game we're playing, right? Right now, the suspension is being built in, and I'm happy to pay the price on someone that could really just be a starter and a difference maker for your fantasy team. So coming around here to round 7, I'm going to move on to my quarterback. And Jordan Love is one of my favorite late middle round picks for quarterback, just because I think he's one of the few guys kind of going quarterback 7 after kind of a bunch of these rushing upside players to go, who has the upside to be a top quarterback. He was a top quarterback for half the season last year. Basically, my thought is if I'm going to take a risk on a later player here, I think I want someone who has the upside. And to me, Jordan Love is in the offense to do that. He showed it for a stretch last year. And I just really love the coordinator, the wide receivers, the line. I love his situation. I think it's very stable. And obviously the Packers believe in him as well, giving him that contract this offseason.
I mean, you don't have to convince me to take Jordan Love. But yeah, like you said, he was quarterback 5 overall last year. In points per game, if you take out Joe Flacco, he was quarterback 5 in points per game. Or with Flacco, quarterback 6. You know, this is somebody who's going in this range where, yeah, he doesn't have the rushing upside, but, you know, it intrigues me. CJ Stroud is going 2 rounds earlier, and I love CJ Stroud. I think he's a great quarterback, but last year, Love threw for more yards, threw for more touchdowns. They both have some great weapons. Obviously, Stroud gets Diggs. I think they're both great. I don't think the difference between them is a full 2 rounds of value in fantasy, where I wouldn't be surprised if CJ Stroud has a better fantasy season than Love, but I also would not be surprised if Love has a better season than CJ Stroud. So I think you're getting a lot of both safety and some potentially elite quarterback play this late in the draft.
And it's just so easy, right? Like this is the thing with the late round QB, or I think late round QB is kind of turned more into round 7, 8 QB. I'm not waiting all the way now. I like to kind of, if I'm going to wait, I like to wait to round 7 or 8 and just kind of select my guys that have the upside. And right now I love Jordan Love, and I also would throw Kyler Murray into that boat. I think Kyler Murray just goes a little earlier than round 7, so I didn't want to use him as the example for this. But I would love to get Kyler Murray at this range as well. So to finish off our targets, Andy and I are going through just 8 rounds of targets. If you are looking for guys later than round 8, we have a couple breakout episodes, sleeper episode, mock draft. We've given you some names. We're going to continue to give you some later round names to target, which is why we're only going from 8 rounds. But Andy, to finish off your draft here, looks like you're taking your tight end. Why David Njoku?
Well, it's the classic 7th-year breakout. You always want to target guys who finally break out in their 7th year of the NFL. But really, it's just he was the tight end 1 from week 7 on, which includes 3 games with Deshaun Watson where he was a top 12 guy. Most of his production came with the backups and then with Joe Flacco, where he was an absolute menace. He's an athletic freak, and if Ayuk does go to Cleveland and they don't get rid of Amari Cooper, then I'm going to be a lot cooler on him. But if, it stays as is, or it's an Ayuk for Cooper kind of swap deal, then I still love him at this value. You have to think that Deshaun Watson was watching those games and seeing David Njoku absolutely ball out and thinking, you know what, maybe I should throw him the ball more. And they were designing plays for him. I feel like this is a guy that they want to get the ball to. They added Jerry Jeudy, but I still feel like there's a limit of pass catching weapons in that offense. And, I think that if you wait this long for tight end, he still has great upside. And, if he doesn't, you're picking somebody in the 8th round. It's not somebody a little bit earlier. So, I'd usually prefer to go a little earlier on tight end with some of the guys this year. But if I've waited, then I'm pretty happy getting Njoku this late in the draft.
Yeah, it's pretty hard to hate on someone who has the upside this late in the draft, just like you said with David Njoku here. From week 7 on, just like Andy was mentioning, he had 2 games. I'm looking at 2 games specifically, 14 targets in week 15, 15 targets in week 11. Weeks 14, 15, 16, and 17, he was absolutely a monster. He had 4 touchdowns over those 4 weeks. Averaged about 10 targets per game the last quarter of the season. So just like you said, those were all with Joe Flacco. But I do think most of the signs the Browns have made this offseason have pointed towards the fact that they want to be a little more pass happy. And we'll see, right? I think so much of the Browns offense comes down to how many games Nick Chubb plays this year. And even if you only get a hot start from Njoku for half the season, he's worth it even then if he comes out hard and gets you 6-7 games of top 5 tight end. He's got the body. He's going to be a red zone threat. And that's really what the tight end game is around. If you get a guy that has a good tight end season, he's going to have a bunch of red zone targets, a bunch of TDs, and David Njoku's that guy. To finish off the show today, I'm going to talk about Brian Robinson. I'll be really quick. I've talked about Brian Robinson a lot. If I'm going to 0 RB thing, I love adding Brian Robinson here to my RB core. I think he's got the upside. He was a top 24 running back last year. He's going as RB 30-something this year. I just think that's a crazy discrepancy. I'm willing to target him and get him as a starter. If I'm going to beat everyone else at my wide receiver positions in fantasy this year, I think you could do a lot worse than getting Brian Robinson onto your team as your RB2 and having a good quarterback, a good tight end.
Yeah, I got nothing much more to add. If he falls to me when we're drafting, then I'm happy to pick him up in the 8th.
So yeah, thank you guys for tuning in for some of our targets. If you have a middle pick in fantasy, we'll be coming at you in the next couple weeks. We'll finish off this series with late picks. So don't worry if you're drafting 9 through 12. We're definitely going to come at you with another video. But Andy, thank you for joining me. As always, go Packers just for Andy. I don't actually care, but I can't say I'm a Vikings fan or anything. I do have JJ on a lot of dynasty teams, though. So we will be watching that take as well. But thank you guys, and we will catch you.